Okay, so, well, hello, I'm Laura from Entrevista, Spain. I'm volunteer there, and I'm one of the volunteers that speaks English, so that's why I'm doing the interview, okay?
Okay.
So if you want to make a small presentation so everybody can know what did you do and who you are, it would be very great.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is George M. Johnson. I am the author of All Boys Aren't Blue, a memoir manifesto. I've been a writer professionally for about 7.5 years now. All Boys Aren't Blue is my debut young adult memoir, which was recently translated into Spanish, as well as French, Portuguese, and in the future will be translated into Korean. Yeah, I am an HIV as well as LGBTQ advocate and activist. My pronouns are they, them. I do identify as non-binary, and yeah.
Wait, I didn't told you, but my pronouns are she, her, okay? Forgot, sorry. Well, we made a series of questions that we think that would be really interesting for people that doesn't know you exactly your work. So
okay.
We would like to know when and how did you realize you needed to write about your own experiences with Blackness and queerness?
Yeah, so I have been writing about Blackness and queerness for some years now, but in bits and pieces. As a journalist, I would write about the stories that weren't getting told. I would also write about my own life experiences in small bits and pieces whenever it became a hot topic that I could easily relate to my own experience as a Black queer person. But there were several major news stories around the deaths and the murders of Black queer people, specifically that of a young Black queer boy named Giovanni Melton. And that story really hit me in a way that many of the others hadn't, because he was killed by his father. And the supposed rumor was that his father had made a statement saying that he would rather have a dead son than a gay son. It was in that moment, I believe that was November 2017, that I knew that I had to do something different, and that I knew that I needed to write the totality of my story if we were ever going to make real change in how queer people are treated, specifically Black queer people are treated, especially within the Black family dynamic. And so that really was the catalyst. I knew at some point I was going to write it, but that was the catalyst to let me know that I had to do this work. And so that's why I wrote All Boys Aren't Blue, because I wanted to showcase what it was like to grow up in a family that was very loving and affirming, even if we didn't have the language and even if we didn't know fully what was going on with me and I couldn't fully express what was going on with me. I always had a place that I could call home. And I wanted to showcase that story, an effort to create changes within other families and communities, to show what could happen when you love and affirm and provide safety for queer people, specifically Black queer people, and how we can be great and awesome and amazing people when we have that type of support in our life.
I think it's really important because there are still lots of parents that still don't accept their queer kids, and I think it's really important to talk about those experiences, right? The positive ones. I think sometimes we are so focused in the negative ones, and to see those things, it's like, whoa, thank you. And in All Boys Aren't Blue, you discuss your experiences also with bullying, the bullying you suffered at a very young age. What do you think you would say to young people who are going through such hard experiences like yours?
Yeah, the one thing that I always try to emphasize with young people is, one, that they're not alone in their experiences. A lot of times I felt like I was alone with what I was going through because I didn't have visibility and representation, and I didn't have a community of people that I could talk to about what my specific issues were. So I always try to emphasize to them that one, they're not alone. Two, that we don't always have to be the product of our experiences. Like that when we have trauma, it is okay to process that trauma, and it is okay to feel that hurt. But I want my work and the thing that I emphasize to them, positive ways in which we can heal from our traumas and move forward from our traumas and grow from our traumas. I also like to emphasize to the youth that, you know, trauma can be hard and it can be detrimental, but we can come out on the other side of it. You know, that we all go through things in life, and it's how we react to those things that really, really showcase and can direct and steer who we actually become in this world. Yeah, and I think, like I said, the biggest thing was to emphasize to the youth that they're not alone. And even more specifically, that there are people like myself who do this work specifically for them, to fight for them and to change systems and to create the safety that I didn't have so that they can have an experience unlike mine, and so that we can, in effort to prevent many of the traumas that I face from ever having to happen to them.
And we sometimes forget about adults, and it's not less important. What kind of advice would you like to give to parents or adults who are in charge of those kids that are suffering now?
Yeah, my advice for parents is to just love your child. I think a lot of parents go into having children with the notion of not ever thinking that their child may not be heterosexual. And I think that's part of the problem, is that society has set up systems where we assume what the norms are, and that the norm is heterosexuality. And so people go into having children thinking that their child is just going to be a heterosexual child that fits what the norm is. And so I'm always emphasizing to parents, like, they have to think outside the box when it comes to their children. And they have to nurture what is innate to their children. I think a lot of parents think that children are a reflection of them, and that's not the case. Children have their own identities, and we are all our own individual people. And so you are raising an individual, and you are there to provide structure and guidance, but you are not there to block and suppress what is innate to your child. And so I'm always just encouraging parents to unlearn everything that society has told them about how a child is supposed to act, simply because they present as man or female, male or female, or man or woman, or boy or girl, and to actually nurture who the child is and what is innate in the spirit of the child, and to lean into that and to follow that. And I think that has helped in a lot of ways. And I've seen, you know, how this book has made parents open their minds up to the fact and the possibility that they may be raising a queer child. And it is their job to nurture and protect and provide safety for the queer child, not to become one of their oppressors in this world that is already anti-queer.
It hit me really hard when you said that thing about unlearning things, because that's what my parents had to do when I came out as bisexual. For them was like, how to learn everything. I thought that would be her life and the life in general, and relationships, sexuality, everything. And well, it was like a lot of memories came to me. Okay. You also talk in the book about your first sexual experiences, and sometimes I feel like you lack a lot of sexual education. So what would you like you were taught about sexuality when you were a kid? Do you think queer youth have access to good sex education now, or it should be better, or what do you think?
Yeah, when it comes to sexual education, especially in the United States, it's lacking. I'm not sure what it looks like globally, but I can only assume that it's probably the same. I think we assume that children are too young to discuss sex and sexuality. We have deemed sex and sexuality as heavy topics, even though sexual abuse, sexual trauma can happen at a young age. And so I think it's important that we start to talk to kids at a very young age about sex and sexuality. I think there's an assumption that if you talk to kids about sex, that they'll want to do it, rather than realizing that they're going to do it anyway because of their own natural inclinations, and that people could prey upon them because they don't have the knowledge and they don't have the resources to even understand what it is that's going on. And so I am a big advocate and proponent of introducing sexual education at a younger age, and then also introducing sex education that is encompassing of all identities, as well as introducing sexual education that talks about sex outside of procreation. I think most places talk about reproduction as like the guise of what sexual education is. And I think we have to expand that knowledge. And I think it does have to start at a much younger age, because kids are going to see it on television. Kids are going to read about it. They're going to see it in many other places. Kids are going to become inquisitive about how they were born. And so to keep that particular conversation away from them only harms and hinders them as they have to navigate life as individuals. And so, yeah, it's a lacking thing, I think, like I said, not just in this country, but worldwide. And it is something that I think many of us are advocating to change, which is why, I wrote a young adult book that included sex, because it is important that kids know what's going on with them, and why their feelings are changing, what puberty is, and how it shifts the mindset, as well as because they have to exist in environments where sex is being discussed amongst peer groups. It's important that they go into it with all of the full education that they can get.
Yeah. I think it's really important too, because I feel, in my experience, that young people now, it's more sexualized than when I was younger. So it's a little bit strange, because there's a lack of sexual education, but at the same time, it's like sex is in everything. And it's like, I don't feel like this is right. But well, we have to fight for this.
Yes.
Yeah. We saw in your Twitter account that you are working now on a TV series based in All Boys Are on Blue. So how's been that experience for you? It's really different than you thought, or how is that?
That experience has been interesting. Adapting my life for television, it's a lot harder than I thought it would be, because I'm so connected to who I am and like what I wrote in the book. And, when you go into television, it has to expand the imagination some, and you have to kind of create situations that may not have happened, but have the same themes as the book. So it's been tough at times, but I think it's been beautiful because it's allowed me to realize that the things that may have happened to me in life, or the things that I didn't get to say in life, I get to say on television, and I get to showcase what could have happened had I had the resources, and what could have happened if situations had turned out a little bit differently. And so I'm really, really excited that we're developing it, and, we'll be able to see what it looks like for a young queer male man to be navigating systems and navigating life and learning their way through what the community they already exist in, as well as the communities of queerness that they are just starting to become invested in and starting to learn about and know about. I think it's going to showcase, the Black experience in a way that we've never seen before. It's going to, give a family dynamic where the queer character is the lead and not just the sidekick or the afterthought in the family. And so I'm really, really excited to bring my story to life in that way, because I think it's going to be transformative for many different communities, as well as parents and guardians and teachers. And I think it just becomes another education tool at the end of the day, for people to see what a life looks like that they may not have experienced. I think that is where we see the most growth and change, when we learn about lives that we don't walk in, and we learn about and we walk in the shoes of other people. And that's how we learn our privileges, and that's how we learn, how we can be oppressors, and that's how we learn and unlearn all of the things that we thought existed in society, and unlearn what we thought was the norm, to realize that there are more people who exist in this world that have a story not similar to ours, but that can connect to us.
We also have seen your next book, We Are Not Broken. It will be out in September.
Yes.
I read that it will speak, among other topics, about your childhood with Nanny, your grandmother.
Yes.
How do you think being raised in a matriarch has shaped your vision of gender and life?
You said, how do I think being raised by a matriarch?
Yeah. How do you think it has shaped your life and your way to see things?
Yeah, being raised by a matriarch, I think it taught us about, like, it helped us to understand misogyny differently, like, you know, because there was a woman leading our lives, and she was a woman who wasn't so dead set on gender norms. Like, you know, we were young boys who she taught, you know, things that women traditionally did, right? Like, she made sure that we all knew how to cook. She made sure we all knew how to clean. She had a nursery, so we all knew how to take care of kids and change diapers. And we all, as boys, we all knew how to do those things that traditionally you would only teach girls to do, and you would have the boys, you know, doing rough stuff or outside or football. And it's like, we did all that too. Like, she encouraged us to play sports and encouraged us to ride bikes. And we, you know, we did all of the quote unquote traditional boy things, but we also did things that traditionally were only taught to girls. And so I think being raised by her, it gave us more of a world view on, one, what the Black woman experience was, what the Black grandmother experience was, but two, it helped shape us into being more well-rounded individuals who didn't always assimilate into the normal gender roles and the gender norms that society places upon us, you know, from birth. You know, being raised by her, it was amazing because, you know, we got wisdom every day in the house, right? And so we didn't have to go looking for it. She was always encouraging us, but always teaching us, even through our mistakes. There was always a lesson to be learned, even within our mistakes. And she always taught us about how family and community, you know, comes first, and how, like, you know, you have to support each other because you are all you have at the end of the day. And I think that's pretty much shaped my activism and why I'm so community first, and why I'm so dead set on changing standards and conditions for other people who don't have the same privileges and access that I do, because that's what she did. She was a foster mother to 24 kids. She, you know, while taking care of her own kids, because she fully understood that there were children in the world who were less fortunate than her own. And she wanted to ensure that they had a home environment and safety and a family that they could always come to. And so I think that has really shaped me in ensuring that people, even within my own life and within my own circles and within my own community, have those same things that I was afforded to have throughout life.
As a non-binary person, how do you think LGBT people can support trans and non-binary children and youth?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as a non-binary person, I think support just has to look like unconditional love. I know that's tough because we are taught to love with conditions, and we are taught that when a child doesn't fit the normal box or category of being a heterosexual child, or even just being, it's almost like I can accept lesbian, I can accept gay, I can accept bisexual. I don't know if I can accept this. Like, this pushes us even beyond the boundary of a box, right? Like trans and non-binary and genderqueer and like all of these other identities. I think it's hard for people because they struggle with it. But honestly, at the end of the day, it goes back to the fact that we are all individuals, and, you know, everybody lives an individual life that isn't going to look the same as the next person. And, you know, to remove the context of boxes from your life, like, because in my opinion, there's no such thing as, honestly, there's no such thing as heterosexuality when you think about it, because every heterosexual is not the same. And so every heterosexual carries their life differently and approaches life differently. And so even when we say, like, we have these structures and standards of gender, it's really make-believe at some point, because for some people, you know, if you're a woman, you shouldn't have rights and you should listen to your husband at all times. You should do this and you should do that. But then for others, you know, it's like, no, my wife runs the house. My wife is the center of my life. My wife is this, my wife is that, right? And so it's like, that's how I view the same thing when it comes to, like, all identities, right? Like we are all individual people, and you know, realistically, we have to allow people to be individuals. And so when it comes to trans and non-binary people, I just want people to listen more and speak less. I want people to take a step back and really learn from us, you know, what it's like to navigate this world, especially when we are in, you know, bodies that we don't necessarily feel like fit a category or fit a thing. And I want people to fully understand that it is okay, because it is about the parts that you can't see. And that's what I always say, it's the parts that you can't see that make us who we are. And so I want us to start to remove the context of, when I see an individual, I'm already labeling that person as a he or a she, or like, that's part of what the unlearning is. It's like when you meet an individual, in order to know who they are, you have to ask them. And so that's all I, you know, really say when it comes to living as trans people and non-binary people. We want you to ask us who we are. And not assume who we are. We want you to not dictate how we have to live based off of how we look. And understand that we have the right to exist and perform and showcase and be who we want to be, because that is our human right. And no society structure has the right to deem that for anyone.
When you talk about when you said that we are people regarding of the labels and so on, I remember at the beginning of being activist and starting to volunteer, I felt like a lot of pressure, like to be the perfect bisexual, to give like the perfect image of the perfect bisexual that didn't meet the stereotypes and those things. Do you feel like you in some part of your life, or in any time, did you feel like that pressure to like show the good side, so everybody thought about you like that's how it's to be non-binary and that's the perfect thing to be?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because people assume like non-binary has to look like a thing, and people assume that trans has to look like this thing, and people assume that this, like, people have these assumptions of what you have to perform like if you want to live within an identity. And so it is tough, because it does always feel like, you know, you're striving, you're fighting a certain image while also trying to live and embody your own image. But it becomes burdensome at times, because I don't think that there aren't enough spaces given to us to even share our stories. Right. And so, you know, we only have a very limited amount of access to even understand what the life experience is like for people who are non-heterosexual. And I think it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you get throughout the acronym, you know, just based off of how oppressive it can be once you start to go through the acronym of LGBTQIA+. And so, for me, I try not to become overwhelmed by it. I try not to allow it to seep into feelings of perfectionism. I always say progress, not perfection. That's my goal. My goal is just progress. I try not to be perfect, because I'm not perfect. And I just do the best that I can to showcase who I am. And I do the best that I can to try to explain who I am and how I feel. And I just, you know, again, all in effort to create changes so that the next generation behind me don't have to go through what I had to go through in terms of suppression and in terms of not having language and in terms of those things. And so, yeah, I try not to become too burdened by it. But I also understand that because I have visibility and because I have this reach and because this story is worldwide, I become the face of a cause. I become the voice of a cause. And so I just try to give myself grace with it and just really do the best that I can to handle the conversation while also opening up the space for more people like me to also carry some of the weight of discussing the conversation so that I'm not the only one.
Mm-hmm. How do you believe anti-racist activism is linked with LGTB plus activism? Do you think that's something similar or something that can be really linked?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, how do you believe anti-racist activism is linked with LGTB activism?
You know, anti-racism is an interesting category. My book has been listed in anti-racist lists, which is cool. Anti-racism is not my work per se. I think that anti-racism, in my opinion, leans too heavily on teaching the oppressor. I think it leans too heavily on the oppressed teaching the oppressor. Let me be very specific. Because if an oppressor who unlearned is teaching the oppressor, then that's okay, that's one thing. But for it to be the burden of a person being oppressed to try and teach the oppressor out of oppression, out of oppressing us, I just think that it becomes, the lens is still not on us. I feel like the focus should still be on the person being oppressed. And so it is directly linked to LGBTQ work because there are Black queer people. So, you know, as a Black queer person, I exist within LGBTQ communities, which are still very racist and still very anti-Black. It is something that comes up all the time about the amount of racism, the amount of anti-Blackness that we deal with as Black queer people from our white queer counterparts. So the two are linked at the hip at the end of the day. Yeah, the two are linked at the hip at the end of the day. But I do think that a lot of times anti-racist work isn't super intersectional. I still think a lot of times it's still coming from a heterosexual lens and a heterosexual view of the world. And so it is not doing enough nuance to talk about how that feeds into communities that are non-heterosexual. But I still think that, in my opinion, I think anti-racist work can be done that still centers the Black person. And I think in my book, I center Black people. And so even though those who are trying to become better at anti-racism and trying to become better advocates and trying to unlearn those things, you know, our white counterparts or other oppressive counterparts who are trying to unlearn those things, I think through my book, my lens is still Black people. My lens is not them. My lens is still, this story is still for Black queer people first, with the understanding that others will learn from it. And so I think that is how I view, I guess, my anti-racist lens, is that in any of the work that I do, I still want to center Black people coming from a Black lens.
We have seen you are also an HIV activist. Do you think people has a real vision about how it's living with it nowadays, or do you think there is still a lot of stigma?
There's still a lot of HIV stigma. There's still a lot of people who don't know enough about the HIV epidemic. There's still a lot of people who don't fully understand that there is still an epidemic, especially for Black queer people, as well as Black women in the United States, as well as Black folks globally. You know, the HIV epidemic is still ongoing. It has not ended. And again, I think it is still heavily stigmatized. The reason I know that is because there are still HIV criminalization laws that exist in the United States. You know, there are still laws against people who are living with HIV and the potential transmission or the potential risk, which risk could mean saliva, risk could mean a lot of things in certain states, depending on how the law is interpreted. And so, yeah, there's still heavy stigma around HIV. I think we've gotten, you know, we've definitely had a lot of progress, you know, clearly with the advancements in science and the advancements in medicine, the advancements in just community, and how, you know, I can live a full life as a person living with HIV. However, it's still so much more to be done because the infection rates are still too high in several communities. And there's still too many barriers to care. There's still too many barriers and lacking of access for those who want to get on meds. You know, and there's still just again, a overall stigmatized lens that is placed on primarily Black LGBTQ people, that most of our stories can't be told unless it is centered on the HIV epidemic or centered on HIV. even now in this day and age. And so I think for me, there is a push to where I want people to understand that HIV is a part of my life. HIV is part of our lives, but it's not the totality of our experience. And so I think that is the work that we are trying to do to destigmatize HIV, because we all don't lead an HIV-centered life.
Some people think that coming out during adult life is useless and less valid than coming out when you're a teen. You said that it took you 34 years to understand your gender identity. So what kind of advice would you give to those late bloomers who are afraid of coming out because they think it's too late for them or it's useless?
Yeah, I guess when it comes to coming out, I don't like that term. I always use the term inviting in. Coming out to me centers other people needing to know who you are. I feel like inviting in centers you. And that means you're allowing people into your space to really know who you are. And so I always just give the advice that, one, nobody is owed that. Like it's your privacy, it's your personal life. And so if you choose to want to say, I identify as this, or I am this, that's your choice. But if you don't want to identify as that, that's also your choice. I think, I don't think there's a right time or a wrong time to do it. We watch kids as young as 4 and 5 be able to say that they're queer. I've seen people 50s and 60s finally, publicly say that they're queer. I don't think there's a right time or a wrong time. I think it's your time. And I think that's the biggest message that I'm always advocating, is that there is you don't have to do it on anyone else's time but your own. And you have to feel safe enough, and you have to feel comfortable enough in your own healing and in your own life to invite people into it. And so, yeah, that's the advice I give, is to reframe it. Don't think of it as coming out. Think of it as inviting people into who you are. And, to do it on your own time, because there's a lot of societal pressure for like coming out. And I just don't agree with it anymore. I think you should be able to live your life as publicly or as privately as you want. But again, I think it's on your own time. So to late bloomers, there's no such thing as a late bloomer, because it's on your time. So.
Last question, because I don't want to take you more time. What would you say to those young boys who might be thinking they aren't straight, or maybe they are trans, or are feeling alone and are afraid of exploring their identity or asking for advice?
Yeah, advice that I would give the youth who are questioning their identity is to, one, not question it. You know who you are better than anybody else. And so there's no need to question it. What you innately feel is valid. It's valid and it's true. And if your body is gravitating towards someone of the same sex, or if your body is telling you and your mind is telling you that you aren't in, that you don't feel like you're in the right body, then that's okay. Like, that's valid and it's real, and that you have history on your side, right? That you have people who for centuries were like you and are like you, so that you don't have to feel alone. And even though they've tried to erase our history, it's still there. And so I think that's what's most important, is that the youth need to understand that you aren't the first to feel that way, that there are centuries of people who have felt the same way as you, and who have lived their lives, and who have transitioned, and who have come out as queer and done all of the things that you're feeling on the inside. And so I think letting them know that they've never been alone in this, and that everything that they are feeling innately is valid. That it's, systems that are telling them that something is wrong with them, but that there is nothing wrong with them, that there are many of us who are reflections of them, and that there will be many more like them afterwards, and to lean into the knowing of who they are, because nobody knows them better than they know themselves.
I keep that a lot.
Thank you.
So thank you for your time. Thank you for answering us. It was a real pleasure to listen to you. And I hope you are very lucky with all your future projects, and we will be lucky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Okay, bye.
Bye.